I have played so many builds in Path of Exile 2, but for some reason the warrior just calls to me. And in this patch 0.5, I finally have been able to check every single box. Now, what are those boxes, you might be asking? Well, it has to be damn near invincible. I don't want to die, because if I die, well, I lose experience, and also that really sucks and makes me not want to play. Number 2, it has to be so powerful that it one-shots bosses, or damn close to it. And number 3, it has to clear at least well enough for me to be able to not take 10 minutes per map. And I think now, finally, with this 3rd iteration of this build, I have achieved that. I'm going to jump straight into what makes this build different from the last 2 videos. And the biggest fundamental change amongst many is going to be the change to Smith of Kitava. Now, why Smith of Kitava? This is supposed to be a Titan build. What about hulking form? What about all these different things that the Titan gives that the Smith of Kitava doesn't? I have thought about it extensively. I have tested it extensively, and the loss from hulking form being gone, I'm actually willing to trade for the defenses that Smith of Kitava offers. Now, I am going to say I do have some problems with Smith of Kitava, which we'll get into in a minute, but I'm going to open up the passive tree and show you guys all of the nodes that I've grabbed from Smith. I haven't touched any of the top nodes at all. I'm basically only concerned with Smith's masterwork. So if we look, we've grabbed body armor grants, 100% of armor also applies to chaos damage. Huge for survivability. Everybody knows chaos damage in Path of Exile 2 is terrible. And then we have body armor grants hits against you have 100% reduced critical damage bonus. Again, big hits equal bad. And then body armor grants 30% increased spirit. This is just going to help fill in some gaps that we have with mana and health sustain. So we fix that with having more spirit. And then 25% of physical damage from hits taken as fire damage. This is huge because physical damage really hurts. So we want to mitigate that as much as possible. And I've put together quite a few clever defensive layers to make this all work together and feel truly like an invincible build. Body armor grants 50% of armor, also applies to elemental damage, and then heat proofing. I don't, guys, I need to like know for sure if this is bugged out or not. I've tried it and I've had it on, I've had it off. I've tried getting hit by poison. I've tried standing in, you know, ignite damage, and I feel like sometimes it works and other times I'm getting poisoned still and I'm getting hit with bleed still. I don't know if it's a bug or if the interaction of unaffected by damaging ailments means that sometimes you can still get those ailments or you still take the hit from those ailments. This is kind of a confusing node for me. So if I weren't using heat proofing, let's say you're like, okay, I don't want to use that, then let's use something else, then I would grab the body armor grants, regenerate 3% of maximum life per second, because you're just getting life regen instead. So keep that in mind. Support straps, 20% increased strength. Kitavan engraving, 15% increased max life. Now let's go over the gear before we jump back into the passive tree later and cover a couple of nodes and the jewels that I have. But as far as gear goes, we're still running the Blistering Bond Ruby Ring and the Amora Mandragora Talisman. I did upgrade the shield, so now the armor is 1697, and I do all the corrupts on my gear. I'm like a corrupt maniac. I have lost tons of money, I have gained tons of money, but I did get an awesome corrupt on this one, which gave me the second socket, which pushed my armor up to 1697. So the shield hits really hard now. I also grabbed this amulet that gives +3 to all melee skills, which I've talked about in previous videos as being the next logical step, and then chaos res, fire res, and attack damage while on low life is kind of a meh stat. You may notice engineered blaze here. We'll get into that in a second, but that is a big reason why this build feels so much better now. But then because we're doing Smith of Kitava, we needed to get an exceptional soldier cuirass, and I want you to take a look at the armor. It's only at 684 armor, so it's super low, and it's still ultra tanky. You could get a better armor than this. This one has the plus 13 to chaos res, that's why I've kept it for so long. But you could definitely get one with higher armor values, and you would be even tankier. You'd have even more armor. As far as the helmet goes, we have percent of armor applies to elemental, some resistances, and then I got another lucky corrupt with the 16% increased armor, so we're almost at 1400 armor on the helmet alone. Moving on to the boots, we've got 5% and 35% increased movement speed. The armor applies to elemental, again, some more reses. The ring, I went with physical and fire damage, more resistances, and then the absolute critical piece, leech, physical attack damage as mana. If you do not have this, then when you're running Lavianga's spirits, you are going to run out of mana. We want to have both Lavianga's and leech percentage of physical attack as mana. Don't get this wrong, because if you get a different ring, you're going to have no mana and wonder what's going on. As we move over to the gloves, we have fire, physical, plus 2 to melee, and honestly, these gloves could be upgraded at this point to get higher rolls of physical and fire, but the build does so much DPS that I really don't need to. I'd kind of just be min-maxing at this point. And as you can see, I've socketed in 8% increased attack speed and 20% increased magnitude of damaging ailments. And magnitude of damaging ailments is calculated separately from other damage increase modifiers. I want you to remember this for when we cover the passive tree in a little bit. Grabbed the Fall of the Axe Silver Charm, so I'm unaffected by slows, which is really nice, and that wraps up the gear piece that we have. Now, the real star of the show is going to come down to the jewels and the passive tree, but I do want to go over the skills because I have changed it from the last time that we have seen this build. As you can see, I am running Combat Frenzy to get the Frenzy charge, and that has Charge Profusion 2 in it, which have 30% chance to grant an additional charge and 15% to grant a random charge, so that's nice. Ferocious Roar hasn't changed, except I added Exposing Cry instead of Efficiency 2. So that way, every single time you war cry, it is applying exposure on enemies. And because our bleed is also fire, we do want to have some way to apply exposure. Okay. Now, Shield Wall hasn't changed, just the way we've set up Shield Wall has changed. So when you're going through and you're mapping, you're going to use Rapid Attacks instead of Rage Forge, and you're going to use Pin 2 instead of Heavy Swing. Why Pin 2 and not Magnified Area 2? You could use Magnified Area 2 if you wanted more AoE, but I also feel like we don't need more AoE at this point. If you wanted to overkill AoE, you could do that. And that's sort of the beauty of the build, is there's so much variability and mixing and matching. So I'll tell you what I do and why I do that, but also know that you can adjust and change things to make it either have a lot of AoE, but it's a little bit slower, or maybe you want it as fast as possible like me, and you can sacrifice, maybe having only one screen blow up instead of multiple screens, right? So I do not run Magnified Area 2. I have Pin, which is how we're generating Frenzy charges, and as we'll go down, you'll see why I even generate Frenzy charges. But Rapid Attacks 2 during mapping, Pin 2 during mapping. Then when you're going to fight a boss, you grab Rage Forge, you put it in Rapid Attacks 2, you take Heavy Swing, you put it in place of Pin. This is going to make sure you hit the boss extremely, extremely hard. You're going to one-shot the boss or come extremely close to it. Now, also for a Pinnacle boss, I don't recommend you keep Rapid Attacks or Pin in there at all. You just swap it out with Heavy Swing and Rage Forge, fight your Pinnacle boss. You don't need the speed, you need the power at that point. Now, on Time of Need, when I swap to the Crocodile form, Time of Need kicks on, so I have that set to Weapon Set 1, and that is Clarity 2, and then Second Wind 3. This is just to give me some extra health and, get rid of curses and elemental ailments. Now, when I'm actually using the shield itself, we have Herald of Ash on, so that will be on weapon set 2 for me, and that's Magnified Area 2, Fire Mastery, and Prolonged Duration 2. Then you can see we have Berserk. This is where I'm going to get into a little bit of a caveat, because if you've seen the prior videos, you're going to say, why is Berserk not being used at all? You could still run Berserk, okay? You could get more spirit, you could run Berserk, you could run this whole setup plus Berserk, but I don't think Berserk is adding enough at this point for me to justify keeping it, because I'm running charge regulation. But you're getting the 18% more armor, evasion, and energy shield while you have an endurance charge, and we are able to run around with 4 endurance charges now easily. And then we have the 24% increased skill speed while you have a frenzy charge. This extra skill speed makes shield wall feel so much better. So I am sacrificing a little bit of the power on rage in order to gain back the speed. And that's a worthy sacrifice in my opinion. If you didn't want to make that sacrifice and you didn't want the extra defense and skill speed, you could just not use charge regulation and run Berserk. But if you didn't use charge regulation, make sure you are not using combat frenzy, because there's no reason to have frenzy charges if you have no charge regulation, right? So don't make that mistake. So you could just run solo Berserk and then drop charge regulation and combat frenzy, but I think it's way better this way. So we got the skills covered. If you guys have any questions, I will always answer them in the comments down below. But let's jump right into the passive tree now and cover the major changes. Smith of Kitava is obviously the biggest one, but we have the wheel of life costs still up and running. I have taken this off so many times and tried to figure out if it'll work without it. I just don't recommend it. I recommend you always have this wheel, and I would rather you get rid of skill speed that you have here on this 3-point wheel than get rid of this wheel that gives you so much mana. But as you can see, a couple of changes that have been mostly made to defense. One of those being running projectile bulwark so that projectiles don't hit us so hard. I was noticing that some of the ways that I was getting chipped down a lot was basically just projectiles. So having that has made a big difference. If you don't care about that, you could also just come down and grab, percent of armor applies to elemental damage, but we've also got a super high amount of that anyway. No matter what, I'm sitting at around 90% armor with the additional physical damage reduction being 7%, and then 63% for elemental damage, and then 70% for chaos damage. So I've found that to be a very nice sweet spot. On my actual Warcry side, I went and added the every rage grants 1% increased armor, because you do have a ton of rage when you switch to the crocodile form, and now we have even more armor. So it's important to kind of think of it this way, and this was a mistake I made with the other 2 videos. The Warcry side is not just going to be about Warcries and speed. It's going to be also about defenses, because you're running around as the crocodile so much that you need to have defenses. And when you swap off the shield, we were getting a very hefty portion of our defenses from shield. So it's like once I switch, before I would actually lose fire res and my armor would drop down by quite a bit. Now you can see I'm going from 89% armor to 82, which isn't the worst drop ever, right? So I'm running around, and then you add the rage element on top of that, and I'm actually back up to about 89. So we're not losing armor. Then the resistances are taken care of elsewhere, so that way I'm not dropping reses every time I'm switching from the shield. And shout out to everyone in the comments, by the way, who have just pointed out some of these like random things to me that I've missed, because it's really helped me like flesh out the build even more. So if you have suggestions, never feel afraid to just drop them in the comments. And that's going to lead me into the biggest change of this build, which is going to be the jewels. If you have been following the build and you recall, I had jewels in here that were basically useless and I didn't spend any money on. Well, now I've spent quite a bit of divine testing, figuring out the best jewels, and we'll just go through them one by one. The first one is going to be a Megalomaniac Diamond, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to find these exact ones, but I will give you some alternatives that you can check out. But if we look at wasting, you're going to get 15% increased duration of damaging ailments, right? Which basically our build is damaging ailments. And then you're going to get 30% increased damage with hits against enemies affected by ailments, right? Which is every enemy. So that's 30% increased damage and 15% increased duration. Now you might look and see the 30% increased damage is the best thing to have. It is to a degree, but anytime you see increased, when you add a lot of percentage to that, let's say we have 300% increased damage and I add 30%, the difference between 300% increased and 330% increased is not going to be that large. And just remember that, because in a few moments we'll cover exactly why I'm telling you that. Then we have Guts, which recover 3% of maximum life for each endurance charge consumed, and it's +1 to maximum endurance charges. How often do we consume endurance charges? All the time. So 3% of maximum life regained every single time we use an endurance charge. I mean, that's huge for survivability. So if you can get one that has wasting and guts, but I would say the most important one to grab would be wasting. And the reason for that is guts is not that far away from where we are in the tree. Guts is right here. So you could take another few points and go and grab guts. The reason I don't do that is because I have this jewel, and also it allows me to put a couple points elsewhere. But if you really wanted the survivability from guts, you could just go grab it. Now moving on, we've grabbed this jewel here, which is just a Heart of the Well jewel, and you cannot be hindered, increase skill speed, gain 10% of damage as extra fire damage, 3% of damage recouped as life, and then 1 rage on melee hit. These are just all maintenance pieces, right? Skill speed makes us faster, damage is really nice, 3% recoup, and 1 rage on hit just helps us, continue this engine that we have. I don't need a massive amount of damage because of the fact that this build is already insane. So this is still probably the weakest one that I have between the two jewels. Now we can move down to the From Nothing Diamond. In this one, we want Necromantic Talisman. So I know what you guys are going to be thinking at this point is this must cost so much. Like, if it's that good, it's going to cost a lot. Guys, this costs like 10 exalt. Really. I've tested out a ton of them. My inventory is filled with From Nothing Diamonds, okay, to try to find the best one. I have gone down and checked out, these bleed nodes. I have gone over here and where is it? One of these looks insane, and it doesn't add anything to the build right here. 40% increased physical damage while affected by Herald of Blood. We use Herald of Blood, so 40% increased physical damage. Okay, 40% increased fire damage. We use fire as well. That's 80% increased damage. That does nothing in comparison to this jewel that we have for 10 exalt. And I'm going to explain to you why. The increased damage, like we talked about earlier, when you're adding it on top of an already big number, it doesn't make a huge difference. But if we go up here, this From Nothing Diamond for Necromantic Talisman, we get this whole circle of an area, and I don't know why it's not showing the circle. I feel like it's bugged, but 15% increased magnitude of bleeding, right? We do bleed. 25% increased physical damage, 15% increased magnitude of damaging ailments you inflict with critical hits, 15% increased magnitude of damaging ailments you inflict with critical hits. Because damaging ailments is a smaller number, there's a smaller amount of things you can get on the tree, this actually makes a massive difference, and we're actually directly scaling the magnitude of the ailments, especially when we're doing crits. Now, you could say that the hit itself adds to the ailment, which is true, but I've tested it both ways. I've tested it with the 80% increased damage and then these increased magnitude of damaging ailments, and it's night and day. One, I see the boss's health bar go down like a decent speed, but not super fast. This, I see the boss's health bar just get totally deleted. So these nodes are going to be better for our specific build than increased damage. Now, what else have I went and grabbed over here? I grabbed the 4% of damage is taken from mana before life. I grabbed regenerate 1% of maximum life per second, and 3% of damage taken recouped as life. So why grab the 4% of damage from mana? Well, on our chess piece, which I didn't cover, we have 15% of damages taken from mana before life. So 15 plus 4, we're at 19%. You still have a couple more that you can grab and to make it even tankier. And that means every time that I'm getting hit, it's actually coming from my mana, which is very easy to sustain with Leech and with Lavianga's Spirits, plus the fact that I'm leeching life and sustaining life that way. It's a whole nother health bar, essentially. I have not died since I've done this. So running those things and then grabbing like a 3% increased max life and some reses is why my Exceptional Soldier Cuirass has such low armor. But you can see that having those changes starts to make defenses make a lot more sense, and our damage has also increased exceptionally from doing so. So that's the one I recommend you guys grab, is the Necromantic Talisman. And then finally, we are going to cover the Anoint, which is Engineered Blaze, which is something that everyone is sleeping on for this build specifically. I've seen you guys in the comments talk about using the hidden Anoint that allows you to passively generate endurance charges. The reason why I wouldn't run that and I would run this instead is because you are getting that 40% increased area of effect, which is simply, magnified area 2. Minus 5%. So it's like running that while allowing for more speed and damage. So we're getting a lot of utility out of it. And you might say at this point, well, I can't generate endurance charges fast enough. So why would I not just run that and say, screw the AoE? You can generate endurance charges fairly easy without using an anoint on it. And that comes from 50% chance when you gain an endurance charge to gain an additional endurance charge. We're gaining endurance charges so much that a 50% chance is actually huge. I want you guys to play around with this build because of how cheap it is. I have not played a build in PoE2 yet that has power, that has decent speed, and that has like insane defenses until this patch and this build. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I might do one more update video. I'm not sure. This might be the last video you ever see on this build. I might create something totally different on a different class, but I will always respond to the comments, and I appreciate all the comments you guys have left.